What would you do if someone questioned your identity, not knowing you held one of the most important positions in the country? This is the extraordinary story of Aisha, a woman whose calm demeanor masked a role far beyond what anyone could imagine. Stay with me. You won't believe how this unfolds. And tell me where you're watching from. Your story might be next. Aisha had always approached life with simplicity. Despite holding a position of immense responsibility, she believed in staying grounded and connected to people. As the Minister of Aviation, her schedule was packed with meetings, inspections, and decisions that shaped the nation's air travel industry. Yet, she often chose to travel quietly, blending in with the crowd. It was a crisp morning at Riverdale Airport. Aisha had arrived early, dressed in casual attire, jeans, a plain blouse, and a shawl. Her warm smile and approachable nature made her blend in with the other travelers. She didn't have an entourage or any special treatment, just her small carry-on and a ticket in hand. As she approached the security checkpoint, she noticed the usual buzz of activity. Travelers were hurrying to their gates, announcements echoed over the speakers, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. Aisha calmly joined the line, her eyes scanning the busy terminal. Ahead of her stood a young mother struggling with a stroller, her toddler tugging at her sleeve. Behind her, a businessman impatiently tapped his phone, muttering about delays. It was an ordinary day until it wasn't. When it was her turn, Aisha stepped forward, placing her bag on the conveyor belt. The security officer, a middle-aged man named Oliver, glanced at her briefly before shifting his focus to the X-ray screen. "Boarding pass, please," he said curtly. Aisha handed over her boarding pass with a polite nod. Oliver's eyes narrowed slightly as he examined it. "ID?" he asked, his tone sharper than necessary. Aisha reached into her bag and pulled out her government-issued ID, handing it to him with the same calm expression. Oliver studied the ID, then glanced back at her. His eyebrows knit together as he scrutinized her face. "This doesn't look right," he said, his voice tinged with suspicion. "Where are you headed?" "Just a short flight to Capital City," Aisha replied, her tone even. Oliver's demeanor shifted. He leaned closer, his voice lowering as he said, "We've had issues with fake IDs lately. I'll need to verify this." Aisha blinked, slightly taken aback but still composed. "Of course, take your time." Oliver stepped away, speaking into his radio. Other passengers in line began to grow restless, exchanging curious glances as whispers spread. Aisha stood calmly, her posture relaxed, but there was a subtle firmness in her gaze. The young mother with the stroller leaned toward Aisha. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Aisha offered a reassuring smile. "Yes, thank you. It's just a routine check." Oliver returned a moment later, accompanied by a supervisor. The two spoke in hushed tones, occasionally glancing at Aisha. She remained still, her expression unreadable. Finally, Oliver approached her again. "Ma'am, we need to take you aside for further questioning." Aisha nodded. "Of course." She followed them to a small room near the checkpoint, aware of the curious eyes tracking her every move. Inside, the supervisor, a woman named Elena, sat across from her. "We're just verifying your identity," Elena said, her tone more professional than Oliver's. Aisha handed over her ID again, this time along with a second document from her bag. As Elena read it, her expression changed. Her eyes widened slightly and she glanced up at Aisha. "Minister Aisha," she began, her voice faltering. Aisha's smile was kind but firm. "Yes, that's correct. I am the Minister of Aviation." Elena sat back, momentarily speechless. Oliver's face turned pale as realization dawned on him. A heavy silence filled the room as the weight of the situation sank in. Aisha leaned forward slightly. "I understand you're just doing your job, and I respect that," she said calmly. "But this experience highlights something important, something we need to discuss." And with that, the story was just beginning. Elena cleared her throat, trying to regain her composure. Minister Aisha, I apologize for the inconvenience. If I'd known— Aisha held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. No need to apologize. Let's take this as a learning moment. Oliver shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence now replaced by visible discomfort. He avoided Aisha's gaze, focusing instead on the ID card still in Elena's hand. The tension in the room was palpable, but Aisha's calm demeanor kept it from boiling over. Elena hesitated, then said, "You're right, ma'am. It's important we address this properly. But if I may ask, why didn't you identify yourself earlier? A person in your position usually travels with a security detail." Aisha leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "I don't want to be treated differently. If I can't experience air travel the way ordinary passengers do, how can I understand the challenges they face? My job isn't just about policies and meetings. It's about ensuring people feel safe and respected when they fly." Elena nodded slowly, absorbing Aisha's words. Oliver, however, looked skeptical. "But with all due respect, ma'am, security is strict for a reason. We have to question people when something seems off." "And you should," Aisha replied, her voice firm but kind. "I'm not saying you did anything wrong by checking my ID. What concerns me is the tone and assumptions that came with it. Tell me, Mr. Oliver, what about me seemed suspicious?" Oliver glanced at Elena, searching for support. "It's not personal," he said finally. "We've had cases of fake IDs, like I said earlier. I was just following protocol." "Protocol is essential," Aisha agreed, leaning forward slightly. "But so is treating every passenger with respect. People should never feel intimidated or judged based on how they look, how they're dressed, or anything else outside of your procedures. Do you see what I mean?" Oliver hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod. "I understand." Aisha's gaze softened. "Good. Because this isn't just about me. Imagine if someone without my position or confidence had been in my shoes. How would they have felt being pulled aside and questioned the way I was?" Elena's face turned thoughtful. "They might feel singled out, or even humiliated." "Exactly," Aisha said. "Now, I don't want to dwell on this, but I hope it gives you both something to consider. Everyone deserves dignity, whether they're a frequent flyer, a first-time traveler, or even a Minister of Aviation." For a moment, no one spoke. Elena looked down at the ID in her hands as if seeing it in a new light. Oliver stared at the floor, his expression unreadable. Finally, Elena stood. "We appreciate your understanding, Minister. We'll make sure this experience helps us improve how we approach these situations in the future." "I trust you will," Aisha said, standing as well. "And thank you for your hard work. I know your job isn't easy." Oliver managed a small smile, nodding his thanks. As Aisha left the room, the weight of her words lingered behind her. Back in the terminal, passengers who had witnessed the earlier commotion were still murmuring among themselves. Aisha walked calmly through the crowd, her steps unhurried. She didn't address the curious stares or whispered questions. She simply made her way toward her gate. But as she passed a group of airport staff, a young trainee stepped forward hesitantly. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her voice nervous but respectful. "I just wanted to say, thank you. What you said back there, it really made me think." Aisha smiled warmly. "I'm glad to hear that. Remember, it's not just about enforcing rules. It's about how you make people feel while doing it." The trainee nodded, her expression determined. "I'll remember that." As Aisha boarded her flight, she couldn't help but reflect on what had just happened. It wasn't the first time she had faced an awkward situation like this, and it probably wouldn't be the last. But each encounter was a chance to leave behind a lesson, a small step toward change. Little did she know, The day's events weren't over yet. The flight was smooth, the hum of the engines blending with the occasional announcements from the captain. Aisha sat by the window, gazing at the clouds drifting below. She was no stranger to air travel, but today's experience had stirred something in her. As the plane began its descent, the cabin crew made their final rounds, ensuring everyone was ready for landing. Aisha's mind was already turning over how to address the issues she had encountered at the airport. It wasn't about pointing fingers. It was about creating a system that treated every passenger with fairness and respect. Once the plane landed and passengers began disembarking, Aisha slipped out quietly. But her plan to leave unnoticed didn't work. As she entered the terminal at Capital City Airport, she was greeted by an older man in a crisp suit, his face lighting up with recognition. "Minister Aisha," he said warmly, extending his hand. "Welcome back. I hope your flight was pleasant." "Thank you, Mr. Kumar," she replied, shaking his hand. "It was a smooth journey, though I had an interesting experience at Riverdale Airport." Kumar, the director of civil aviation, raised an eyebrow. "Interesting? Should I be concerned?" Aisha gave him a small smile. "Not concerned, but it's something we need to address. Let's meet in my office later. I have some ideas." As they walked toward the airport's administrative wing, Kumar filled her in on the latest updates, policy changes, ongoing projects, and the feedback they'd received from passengers. But Aisha's focus remained on the broader issue. Later that afternoon, seated in her office, Aisha called a meeting with key members of her team. Kumar, along with representatives from airport operations, security, and passenger services, gathered around the conference table. The atmosphere was professional but curious. Everyone wondered what had prompted the sudden meeting. "I want to talk about passenger experience," Aisha began, her voice steady but firm. "Today, I had a situation at the security checkpoint that highlighted something we've overlooked." She recounted the incident, leaving out names but detailing the interaction. The room fell silent as she spoke. Some nodded in understanding, while others exchanged glances of concern. "I'm not sharing this to criticize," she continued. "I'm sharing it because it revealed a gap in our system. Security and efficiency are important, but so is dignity. No passenger should feel judged, intimidated, or unfairly treated." Kumar leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "You're right, ma'am. But how do we balance strict security measures with a more empathetic approach?" Aisha smiled slightly. "That's what we're here to figure out. I want us to rethink our training programs, not just for security staff, but for everyone who interacts with passengers. Empathy, communication, and respect need to be as integral as scanning IDs and luggage." One of the younger members of the team, a woman named Zara, spoke up. "What about feedback systems? Could we create a way for passengers to share their experiences directly with us? It might help us identify recurring issues." "Excellent idea," Aisha said, nodding. "We'll pilot a program for that. And let's involve our staff in shaping the changes. They're on the front lines. They'll have valuable insights." The meeting continued, ideas flowing back and forth. By the end, the room buzzed with a sense of purpose. Aisha had turned a personal encounter into a catalyst for systemic improvement, and her team was ready to make it happen. As the meeting adjourned, Kumar approached her. "You know, Minister, most people in your position wouldn't have given this a second thought. They would have dismissed it as a minor inconvenience." "That's exactly the problem," Aisha replied. "Minor inconveniences for us can be major barriers for others. If we want people to trust the system, we have to show them it works, for everyone." Kumar nodded, admiration clear in his eyes. "You're setting a new standard." Aisha smiled faintly. "That's the goal." Unbeknownst to her, the seeds of change she had planted were about to grow in ways she hadn't anticipated. The real impact of her actions would soon ripple far beyond the walls of her office. 2 months after the changes were set in motion, Aisha found herself back at Riverdale Airport. This time, she wasn't traveling incognito. She was here to oversee the launch of a new training program for airport staff, a direct result of her earlier experience. The terminal buzzed with its usual energy, but there was something different about the atmosphere. Aisha noticed smiles on the faces of passengers and staff alike. She saw a young security officer assisting an elderly traveler with their bag, and a check-in clerk patiently explaining boarding procedures to a family with limited English. Kumar, standing beside her, gestured toward the security checkpoint. "We've already received positive feedback from passengers. The empathy training is making a difference." Aisha nodded. "It's a start. But let's not stop here. This isn't about perfection. It's about constant improvement." As they walked through the terminal, they passed a group of security officers huddled around a screen. One of them noticed Aisha and stepped forward, her face lighting up with recognition. It was Elena, the supervisor from the day of the incident. "Minister Aisha," she said warmly, "it's an honor to see you again. I just wanted to thank you. The training program you initiated, it's changed the way we work." Aisha smiled. "Thank you for embracing it. How's the team adapting?" "Better than I expected," Elena replied. "At first, there was some resistance, especially from those who've been here a long time. But once they saw the impact on passengers, they came around. Oliver, in particular, has completely transformed." "Is that so?" Aisha said, glancing toward the checkpoint. Elena nodded. "He's even mentoring new hires now, teaching them the importance of treating passengers with respect." Aisha felt a wave of satisfaction. Change wasn't easy, but moments like this proved it was worth the effort. "That's good to hear. Keep up the great work." Later, during the official launch of the training program, Aisha stood before an audience of airport staff, government officials, and media representatives. The stage was simple, but the message was profound. "2 months ago," she began, "I had an experience at this very airport that made me question how we, as an industry, approach our work. Security and efficiency are essential, but they mean nothing if we forget the human element." The room fell silent as her words sank in. Every passenger who walks through these doors has a story. Some are traveling for joyous occasions, others may be going through the hardest times of their lives. What they all deserve, what we owe them, is dignity. This program isn't just about improving processes. It's about fostering trust and showing compassion. Aisha paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. "The changes we make here today will ripple outward. They'll touch the lives of passengers, inspire confidence in our systems, and set an example for others to follow. Let's make sure those ripples matter." The audience erupted into applause, but Aisha's message wasn't just for the people in the room. It was for everyone watching the event unfold, whether in person or through the news. She hoped the story would spark conversations far beyond the airport walls. As the event concluded, Aisha took a moment to reflect. She knew there was still a long road ahead, but she also knew this was a turning point. The world needed more moments like these, moments where small actions led to meaningful change. As she left the terminal, she passed a mother helping her child through security, a young officer offering a reassuring smile. For Aisha, that simple interaction symbolized everything she had worked for. The next day, the story of the program launch made headlines. Minister of Aviation leads by example, transforming passenger experience across airports. But for Aisha, the true success lay not in the recognition but in the countless lives these changes would touch. Her journey wasn't just about policy, it was about people, and she hoped the message would resonate with everyone watching. Respect and empathy aren't optional. They're the foundation of every meaningful connection, no matter where you are,